The air hung thick and heavy over the Louisiana Bayou in the summer of 1904, a suffocating blanket woven from humidity and the decay of cypress knees. The scent of stagnant water and marsh gas was the constant, unwelcome perfume of life in Belle Riviere Parish. It was here, miles deep into the watery labyrinth, that the Stephen family made their home. A clapboard house, grayed and sinking slightly into the mud, a defiant speck against the indifferent vastness of the swamp. Elias Stephen, a man whose face was perpetually etched with the worry lines of a failing farmer and a quiet desperation, stood on the porch. His gaze was fixed on the sluggish brown water that lapped at the edge of his property. The sun, a molten disk behind the haze, cast no warmth, only a sickly yellow light. Elias wasn't thinking about the failing cotton crop or the debt pressing down on him like the bayou's own gravity. He was thinking about the silence. It wasn't the silence of nature. The drone of cicadas and the distant mournful croak of a heron were ever present. It was the silence inside the house, the unnatural quiet that had settled like dust since the passing of his eldest daughter, Mary, 6 months prior. Mary hadn't died of fever or a serpent's bite, the common swift exits in the bayou. She had simply faded, a sudden, terrifying decline marked by listlessness, night terrors, and a profound, chilling detachment. The doctor, a nervous man from New Orleans who smelled faintly of formaldehyde, had muttered something about melancholia and swamp sickness, but Elias knew it was something else. Something that had begun the day she insisted with wide, terrified eyes that someone, or something, was watching them from the perimeter of the tall reeds. Inside, the house felt colder than the muggy air warranted. Eleanor, Elias's wife, a woman whose once vibrant red hair was now streaked with premature gray, was in the kitchen. She wasn't cooking. The iron stove was cold. She was polishing a single tarnished silver spoon, scrubbing it with a ferocious, almost mechanical intensity that spoke of suppressed grief and fear. Their remaining child, young Thomas, was only 10, but he carried the weight of a man twice his age. He was sitting on a low stool by the back door, whittling a piece of soft pine. His movements were slow, deliberate, and his eyes, usually bright with mischief, were dull. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of sentences in a week. Eleanor. Elias's voice was low, barely a whisper against the cicada chorus. I'm going to town. We need flour, and I need to speak with old Mr. Dubois about the boat. Eleanor didn't look up. The boat is fine, Elias. Leave the boat alone. The hull is soft, Eleanor. It needs patching before the next storm. And we need to see a face that isn't ours. We're rotting here. She finally stopped scrubbing, her knuckles white. She looked up, her eyes sunken and rimmed with red. We're not rotting, Elias. We're waiting, and there's nothing for us in town but pity and rumors. They already whisper about Mary. The word rumors hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The locals weren't just whispering about grief, they were whispering about the Stephens' sudden isolation, about the way Elias had locked up Mary's room, and about the odd, almost feral behavior of the family dog, which had run off 3 months ago and never returned. I need to go, Elias insisted, grabbing his worn leather satchel. He felt an intense, irrational urgency to leave the house, to feel solid ground beneath his feet and not this perpetual yielding mud. As he turned to leave, Thomas finally spoke, his voice thin as spun glass. Papa, will you bring back the book? Elias froze. What book, Thomas? The one Mary was reading, the one you took. Elias felt a cold spike of panic. He had completely forgotten about the small black-bound book he had found tucked under Mary's mattress. It was a strange, nondescript volume, the cover blank, the pages filled with dense, elegant script, not her handwriting. He hadn't been able to make sense of the cryptic symbols and unfamiliar language that dominated its passages. He'd hidden it in the attic, deep in an old trunk. An act of desperate superstition, believing the book was somehow tied to her decline. There was no book, Thomas. Elias lied, the denial coming too quickly, too harshly. Your sister was tired, she wasn't reading. Thomas only lowered his head, his small shoulders slumping. He knew his father was lying. Eleanor, watching the exchange, merely tightened her grip on the spoon, her eyes now fixed on Elias with an unsettling intensity. "Go, Elias," she said, her voice a flat monotone. "But don't be long. The tide will be high, and the night here is unforgiving." Elias didn't wait. He grabbed his old Winchester rifle, always a necessary companion in the bayou, and strode out. The familiar creak of the porch swing sounded unnaturally loud behind him as he descended the rotting steps. As he pushed his small, flat-bottomed boat away from the muddy bank, he glanced back at the house. The low evening light was finally breaking through the haze, illuminating the windows. He saw Eleanor standing perfectly still in the kitchen window, watching him. But it was the other window that caught his breath, Mary's window facing the bayou. For a fraction of a second, Elias was certain he saw a shadow move behind the dusty glass. A dark shape that was too tall for Thomas and too indistinct to be Eleanor. It lingered, a blot against the weak light, and then it was gone. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He didn't believe in ghosts or specters. His world was a harsh reality of work, debt, and death. But that movement, that silent observing shape, felt real. It felt like the chilling confirmation of Mary's final desperate whispers. "They're still here, Papa." They never left. He yanked the starting cord on the small motor he'd rigged to the boat, the sudden jarring noise a welcome intrusion into the bayou's deep silence. He sped away from the house, his paranoia a living thing, a shadow growing long in the boat beside him. He needed to get to town, to logic, to other people. He needed to escape the unnerving, palpable weight that was pressing down on his family, a weight that hadn't lifted with Mary's burial. It had only begun. The boat disappeared around a bend in the water trail, leaving the house alone, sinking deeper into the encroaching twilight. The only sound was the drip of water from the moss-covered eaves, and, inside Mary's locked room, the faint rhythmic thump, thump, thump of something light and hard rolling across the bare wooden floorboards. This is only the beginning of the Stephen family's dark story. If you want to follow the rest of this disturbing journey through the shadows of the Louisiana Bayou and uncover the mystery, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. The small settlement of Belle Riviere Landing was less a town and more a collection of shacks clustered around a single muddy pier. But to Elias, the sight of other people offered a temporary, desperately needed anchor to sanity. The air here, though still humid, smelled of stale tobacco and fish. A welcome change from the bayou's marshy rot. He tied the boat and headed straight for the general store, Dubois' Emporium. Inside, the gloom was broken only by the light filtering through the dust-coated windows. Old Mr. Dubois, a skeletal man with eyes that missed nothing, was behind the counter, weighing a bag of dried beans. "Elias Stephen," Dubois said, his voice raspy, devoid of warmth. "Haven't seen you since the burying. Heard the silence out at your place is so loud, it's driving the gators further inland." Elias ignored the veiled barb. He knew the rumors were already cemented. "Flour, Mr. Dubois." "And some kerosene." The usual. As Dubois moved to fetch the goods, Elias lowered his voice. "I also wanted to ask about the other matter." Dubois stopped, his back to Elias. "The only other matter is the one you already know. Taxes." "No, the other one. Mary's decline. Did she ever speak to your son, Louis, about anything odd before she got sick?" Dubois turned, his face unreadable. "My Louis? Why would he speak to your Mary about anything? They were polite, no more." "And Mary wasn't sick, Elias. She was changed. Everyone saw it." Elias gripped the counter's edge. "What do you mean, changed?" She stopped smiling, stopped speaking clearly. She just stared. like her soul had been exchanged for river stones, and she started asking about things that didn't make sense. Strange tracks in the mud, sounds in the night, the kind of madness that takes people who live too far out. Did she mention a book? Elias pressed, his voice barely audible. A black book? With odd writing. Dubois' eyes narrowed. The silence that followed was heavy, more terrifying than any accusation. Elias, what are you talking about? There are no books like that around here. Only Bibles and ledger books. You're talking nonsense. The grief has finally taken hold. Elias realized he'd made a mistake. He was feeding the rumors, solidifying the town's belief in the Stevens' burgeoning madness. He took the flour and kerosene, paid with strained politeness, and left, the weight of their judgment settling on his shoulders. He knew he couldn't leave town without addressing his initial errand, the boat. He headed down the pier to the shed, where he planned to pick up a barrel of pitch. It was there he found Louis Dubois, Mr. Dubois' son, a young man who looked perpetually uncomfortable in his own skin, huddled under the pier, smoking a thin, hand-rolled cigarette. Louis quickly hid the cigarette when he saw Elias. "Mr. Stephen," Louis mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Louis, I need a moment of your time. About Mary." Louis's face went pale, a stark white against the evening gloom. I don't know anything, Mr. Stephen. My father said I shouldn't talk about it." "She was your friend," Elias insisted, the desperation lending his voice a raw edge. "Just tell me if she ever showed you anything. A book, a piece of paper with symbols." Louis chewed his lip, his eyes darting towards the emporium. She showed me a picture once. Not a photo, a drawing. She did it herself. Said she was drawing what she saw outside her window. What was it?" Elias leaned in, his entire focus riveted on the young man. "It was a fence. A very straight line of tall reeds, Mr. Stephen. But standing behind the reeds, she drew a scarecrow, but not a regular one. It was all straight lines, too tall. And it had no face, just a wide, perfect circle where a head should be, and its hands were huge, like branches." A cold dread washed over Elias. This wasn't Mary's artistic style. Her drawings were soft, childlike. Did she say what it was? She said it was the silent man. She said he only came out when the water was low, and he stood perfectly still. But he was watching, always watching. She said she only drew it after she found the coin. The coin? Yeah. A silver coin. Old. She said she found it near the old hunting blind, way out past your property line. She kept it in her pocket. After that, she started seeing the silent man. Louis finally met Elias's gaze, his eyes wide with fear. "A week after the funeral, I went out there, Mr. Stephen, to the hunting blind, and I found the drawing, folded up. Where is it now, Louis?" "I burned it, sir. I was terrified. It felt wrong, Mr. Stephen, like it was watching me too. But I found something else there, by the remnants of her fire." Louis reached into his trousers pocket and pulled out a small, dark object. It was a small, perfectly carved wooden doll. Crude, perhaps 3 inches high, made of dark, heavy wood. Its arms were straight down its sides, its legs stiff. It had no discernible features, just a smooth, dark egg of a head. It looked exactly like the scarecrow Louis had described. "I didn't touch it, Mr. Stephen," Louis whispered, holding it out on his palm, not daring to grip it. "I just brought it here. It feels cold, always." Elias reached out, his hand trembling, and took the figure. It was disturbingly heavy for its size. As his fingers closed around the smooth, cold wood, he felt an immediate, profound sense of violation, a certainty that this object was not only connected to Mary's decline, but was an active, sinister intrusion into their lives. The fear that had been a vague notion now became a tangible, solid enemy. "Thank you, Louis," Elias said, his voice flat. He slipped the doll into his pocket, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. "Don't tell your father, or anyone." "I won't," Louis promised, scrambling away. "Just be careful, Mr. Stephen. The Bayou doesn't give up its secrets easily." Elias stood there, the weight of the little wooden doll heavy in his pocket, a stark contrast to the lightness of his supplies. The flour and kerosene were necessities for life. The doll, a token of death. The silence and isolation of his home, which he had so desperately sought to escape, now seemed preferable to the chilling confirmation he'd just received. Mary hadn't succumbed to grief. She had been stalked, observed, and terrorized by something real, something that left behind tangible evidence. And now, Elias held that evidence. The sun was setting, painting the water a deep, unsettling shade of violet and orange. The bayou waited for him, its labyrinthine waterways now seeming less like a route home and more like an inescapable trap. Elias knew he had to return, but not just to his family. He had to return to find the book in the attic. The book, the doll, and the silent man. A pattern was emerging, one woven from secrecy, fear, and a terrifying, unknown human element lurking just beyond the reeds. The return journey was a blur of heightened senses. The drone of the motor was no comfort. Every snap of a twig, every splash in the water made Elias flinch. He steered the boat by memory, his mind fixated on the cold, smooth wood of the doll in his pocket. It felt like a small, silent heart, beating with malice. He found the house shrouded in a suffocating darkness. No lamps were lit inside. The sight sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He cut the motor and quickly tied the boat. "Eleanor! Thomas!" he called out, his voice echoing in the muggy air. The front door opened slowly, revealing Eleanor silhouetted against the meager moonlight filtering through the back windows. Her eyes were wide and dark. "Elias, you're late. I thought you'd never come back," she said, her voice thin. "I was delayed," he said, stepping inside, depositing the supplies. The air inside the house was stale, heavy, a sharp contrast to the moist air outside. "Where is Thomas?" "Asleep. He was upset you left." "Upset about the book?" Her gaze was piercing. "Why did you lie to him, Elias? You know he hasn't been right since Mary." She trailed off, unable to voice the completion of the thought. "I didn't lie," Elias said, avoiding her eyes. "I didn't want him dwelling on nonsense. I need to go to the attic, Eleanor. I need to check something." She didn't question him. She merely nodded, her eyes distant, already moving back toward the kitchen, toward the polished silver spoon she had left on the counter. The spoon was gone. Elias, ignoring the small, irrational jump of unease, grabbed the oil lamp and headed up the narrow, rickety attic stairs. The attic was suffocatingly hot, smelling of dried leaves, old linens, and mothballs. He found the old trunk under a dusty tarp, its rusted latch protesting loudly as he forced it open. He located the black book quickly, tucked beneath his old army coat. It was small, heavy, and cold to the touch, just like the wooden doll. He held the oil lamp close, opening the book's blank cover. The interior pages were not paper, but thin, dried vellum. The script was precisely as he remembered. Strange, intricate symbols that resembled a mix of ancient runes and complex mathematics. He sank down onto the dusty floorboards and flipped through the pages. The language was clearly not English, French, or Spanish, the common tongues of the region. It was dense, filled with drawings interspersed with the text, geometric shapes, diagrams that seemed to map out movement and position, and repetitive, disturbing illustrations of a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of thick vegetation. The silent man. As he studied a particularly elaborate page, he realized the script wasn't random. It was a cipher, a code that someone had meticulously constructed. The question was, who? Suddenly the floorboards behind him groaned. Elias whirled around, clutching the lamp and the rifle he had carried up with him. It was Eleanor. She was standing on the landing, her face pale, her eyes wide and fixed not on Elias, but on the book. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice laced with a genuine raw fear Elias hadn't heard from her since Mary first fell ill. "I found it under Mary's mattress," Elias admitted. "I hid it. I thought it was connected to her. It has to be, Eleanor. Look." He held it out. Eleanor didn't touch it. She recoiled, putting a hand over her mouth. No, Elias, that writing. I've seen it before." Elias's blood ran cold. Where did you see this, Eleanor?" She lowered her hand, her eyes now burning with a desperate, lucid panic. "It was on the outside of the hunting blind. That old one, way past the field line. I went there to pick pecans last year. Someone had carved symbols into the wood. I never told you. I thought they were just foolish boys making marks, but those symbols, they're in that book, Elias. I remember the three-pronged fork and the circle with the line through it." Eleanor's revelation cemented the grim reality for Elias. This wasn't just Mary's delusion, it was an external, persistent threat. The book, the carvings, the doll, they were all components of a dark mechanism set in motion by a human agent. "Who owns that land, Eleanor?" Elias asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It's the old Landry property, abandoned for 20 years. The heirs live up north. No one goes out there, Elias. It's too deep in the marsh. Why would anyone be out there carving symbols and leaving things?" "They were there for Mary," Elias stated, conviction hardening his voice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden doll. "Louis Dubois gave me this. He found it by the hunting blind. Mary called it the Silent Man. He's in the book, Eleanor. He's the one Mary saw." Eleanor stared at the doll, then back at the cryptic pages. A tear finally tracked a path through the dust on her cheek. Mary kept whispering, "The man who never moves." She said he stood there for hours, just waiting for her to come outside. "Elias, we have to leave. Now, before Thomas sees this." Elias stood up. The heat, the dust, the despair of the attic momentarily forgotten. "No, we can't just run. If we run, they'll know we're scared and they'll follow. Whoever this is, they terrorized our daughter until she faded. They won't stop with us gone. They'll just move on to the next isolated family. We're going to use this book. This is their map. And we're going to figure out who is writing in it." He looked at the dense, coded script. He was a farmer, not a scholar, but he knew logic. He wouldn't give in to the superstitious terror of the Bayou. "We need help," Elias admitted. "Someone who understands codes or old languages, someone who won't just label us as crazy." Eleanor wiped her face, the grief momentarily eclipsed by the grim resolve she saw in her husband. "There's only one person who might know. Mrs. LeBlanc, the old recluse who lives past the ferry. She's educated. Everyone says she's crazy, but she was a librarian in New Orleans before she came out here. She studies old things. She's the only one." The decision was made. The next morning, Elias would take the boat out again, not to town, but deeper into the bayou, towards the infamous home of a rumored lunatic. He tucked the book securely inside his jacket. As he descended the stairs, he paused, looking back at Eleanor. "The spoon, Eleanor. Where is the silver spoon you were polishing?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She walked past him, her eyes vacant again, her movements stiff. "I put it away, Elias. It's put away." But Elias knew she hadn't. He had seen the way she obsessed over that one tarnished piece of silver. He didn't press the matter. There were too many mysteries now, and one small missing object was a distraction. Yet, as he closed the attic door, the image of Eleanor's blank, distant eyes and the cold, smooth feel of the little wooden doll in his pocket filled him with the chilling certainty that the terror was not only outside their home, but was also slowly, insidiously, taking root within the very foundation of the Stephen family. The journey to Mrs. LeBlanc's dilapidated cottage was a perilous undertaking. It was a 3-hour run by boat, weaving through the most unforgiving stretches of the marsh, where the waterways were narrow, choked with water hyacinth, and easy to lose. Elias felt a profound sense of isolation, the sheer magnitude of the Bayou's indifference amplifying his fear. He found Mrs. LeBlanc's place nestled on a small, overgrown rise, a house that looked as if it had been built from salvaged driftwood and neglect. A hand-painted sign, faded and tilted, read, "Research, Reticence, Retreat." He knocked on the warped wooden door. After a long silence, a heavy bolt was drawn back. The woman who opened the door was startling. Mrs. LeBlanc was small and bird-like, with a shocking mane of white hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her eyes, however, were keen and intelligent, not the vacant gaze of a lunatic. She wore a stained linen dress and smelled strongly of tobacco and old paper. "Mr. Stephen," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "I know who you are, and I know why you are here. It's about the silence, isn't it? The silence that only you can hear." Elias blinked, momentarily stunned by her directness. "Yes, ma'am. But also it's about this." He stepped inside, ignoring the clutter of books stacked floor to ceiling, and pulled out the black book. Mrs. LeBlanc took the book without hesitation, her long, thin fingers running over the cover. She didn't open it immediately. "This feels heavy, not just in weight. You believe this is connected to your daughter's passing." "I know it is," Elias stated. She found it, and then she started seeing things. A man, a silent man. Mrs. LeBlanc finally opened the book to a random page. She held it to the light, her eyes quickly scanning the dense script and geometric drawings. A low whistle escaped her lips. "This is not a language, Mr. Stephen," she stated, looking up, her gaze penetrating. "It's a code, a highly specialized modern cipher. But the principles it uses are ancient. It uses positional notation and a substitution key based on a cyclical pattern. It's the work of a highly disciplined, well-educated, and deeply disturbed mind." "Can you read it?" Elias pressed. "I can break it," she corrected. "But not here, not now. It requires time, concentration, and resources. I recognize the structural influence. It draws from a system used by a small, defunct philosophical society in New Orleans. They called themselves the Ordo Silenti, the Order of Silence. They were essentially a group of social manipulators, using fear and isolation to control those they deemed weak or susceptible. Control? How? They specialized in psychological degradation, isolating people, establishing a persistent, non-supernatural terror. Imagine, your daughter is alone, miles from town. She starts seeing the same figure, always at the edge of sight, always silent. She mentions it, you dismiss it. She begins to doubt her own sanity, then your love, then her place in the world. The psychological pressure becomes a physical illness. It's a calculated, slow form of murder. Elias felt a surge of rage, chilling and pure. They killed her. "They certainly caused her decline," Mrs. LeBlanc confirmed, "and this book, I suspect, is their handbook. It details the methods, perhaps even the targets." She pointed to one of the geometric diagrams. "This is a map, not of the stars, Mr. Stephen. Of a localized area. I need to cross-reference this with a local survey map of the Bayou." "I have maps at home," Elias offered. "No, we do this here. Now, your house is compromised. They know you have the book, or they will soon. This order would not leave such a piece of evidence unsecured." She paused, her eyes focused on his jacket pocket. "What else did Mary leave you?" Elias hesitated, then pulled out the wooden doll. Mrs. LeBlanc took it, her expression hardening. "A fetish doll. And a psychological trigger. It represents the persistent watcher. The doll is a key part of the manipulation. It's tangible proof of the threat, designed to keep the victim in a state of terror, even when the silent man is not physically present. She tossed the doll back to him. "Burn it, now. It has no power unless you give it power." Elias took the doll and, without a second thought, threw it into the roaring fire in the small hearth. The wood hissed, then began to smoke, but did not catch fire immediately. The smell was acrid, like burnt varnish and something metallic. "Now, the map," Mrs. LeBlanc declared, pulling a large, brittle, rolled-up chart from a shelf. "We work fast. If this cipher is what I think it is, the key is the geographical location of the subject's home. The book uses the precise coordinates of your farm as the root of the decryption sequence." For the next 2 hours, Elias and Mrs. LeBlanc worked in tense silence, comparing the vague, elegant lines in the book to the detailed contours of the old Bayou map. The air was thick with the faint, disturbing smell of the burning doll. Finally, Mrs. LeBlanc slammed her finger onto the vellum page and then onto the map. "There, the intersection of this arc," she traced a line with her finger, "and this perpendicular angle, it corresponds to a precise location." The point on the map was a tiny, uninhabited island deep in the marsh, several miles from the Stephen farm and near the abandoned Landry hunting blind. It was a place known locally as the Sinking Patch, a small, barely stable piece of land. "What is out there?" Elias demanded. "Nothing known," Mrs. LeBlanc said, her brow furrowed. "But look at the text this point unlocks." She quickly scribbled notes on a piece of paper, translating the newly deciphered passage. She handed the note to Elias. His hands shook as he read the English translation. Subject, Mary. Status, terminated. The psychological barrier collapsed. New subject, Thomas. Suboptimal but available. Observation point, the hidden structure. Commencement, the turning of the tide. Elias felt a wave of nausea. The hidden structure? New subject, Thomas. What is the turning of the tide? Mrs. LeBlanc didn't look up, her gaze fixed on the map. The hidden structure is their base of operations, the place they observe you from, and the turning of the tide. That's tonight, Mr. Stephen, the high water crest. It's their signal. They're moving on Thomas. They've been watching your son, just like they watched Mary, and tonight they intend to conclude their operation. Elias grabbed his rifle. His terror had curdled into a cold, focused fury. "I'm going to the Sinking Patch. Wait." Mrs. LeBlanc grabbed his arm. "They are highly organized. They may have a watchman at your home. You must be careful, Elias. But first, there's one more thing." She pointed to a line of text at the bottom of the page. Elias read the final decoded line. "The silver marker has been secured. Observation team is in place." "What is the silver marker?" Elias asked, his mind racing. Mrs. LeBlanc looked him straight in the eye. "It's a small personal object, something mundane that has immense emotional value to the victim's family. A trigger to sow psychological discord, to make the victim feel as though the threat is inside their home, taken by someone they trust. Elias, I believe the silver marker is that spoon, the one Eleanor was polishing." The blood drained from Elias's face. Eleanor hadn't just put it away. It had been stolen. The suspicion and isolation that had driven a wedge between him and his wife had been perfectly orchestrated. The terror was not just outside. The operators of the Ordo Silenti were far closer than he ever imagined. Elias left Mrs. LeBlanc's cottage in a state of controlled frenzy. The fog of vague fear had lifted, replaced by the sharp, terrifying reality of a methodical human threat. He now had a name for the enemy, the Ordo Silenti, a purpose, and a target, the Sinking Patch. He sped the boat back along the tortuous waterway, every minute feeling like an hour. He knew he was racing against the tide and against an organized cell of manipulators intent on executing the next phase of their plan, the psychological breakdown of his son, Thomas. As he neared his property, the sun had fully set, and the bayou was swallowed by a moonless, inky blackness. He cut the motor far from the house and let the current carry him in, gliding silently to the bank. The house was dark, just as before. Too dark. Elias crept onto the porch, his Winchester rifle held ready. He tried the front door. Locked. He remembered Eleanor's rigid insistence on keeping the house locked at all times since Mary's death. He moved around to the back and slipped inside through the kitchen window, which he had deliberately left unlatched. The air inside was heavy with a familiar metallic scent that he couldn't place, but which heightened his alarm. "Eleanor! Thomas!" he called, his voice a tight whisper. He found Eleanor first. She was sitting upright in the rocking chair in the parlor, fully dressed, staring straight ahead at the unlit fireplace. She didn't respond to his entrance. "Eleanor, what is it? Where is Thomas?" Elias demanded, placing a hand on her shoulder. Her skin was unnaturally cold. "He's in his room," she murmured, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He wanted to be alone. He's been talking to his sister, Elias." Elias's fear spiked. "He's not talking to Mary, he's talking to them. They're using this to confuse him, Eleanor. We have to go now. I know who they are, I know where their base is." He pulled her to her feet, but she resisted, her strength surprising. "No, we can't leave. They said they would only leave us alone if we stayed inside, if we were quiet, if we stopped looking." "Who said, Eleanor? Who told you this?" She just shook her head, her eyes wide and wet. "The man who gave me the spoon back. He said Mary was happy now, but Thomas would only be safe if we were silent. He was very kind, Elias. He only wanted quiet." Elias realized with a sickening jolt that Eleanor was no longer just a victim of grief. She had been co-opted. Her psychological defenses were breached, and she was now, unintentionally, an instrument of the Ordo Silentes control, driven by a twisted promise of safety. The missing spoon had been used not to sow marital discord, but to solidify her obedience to the external manipulators, convincing her they were benevolent custodians of their peace. He couldn't waste time arguing. He gently pushed her toward the chair. "Stay here, Eleanor. I'm getting Thomas. Then we're leaving." He ran down the short, dark hallway to Thomas's room. The door was ajar. He pushed it open and held the lamp high. Thomas was sitting on his bed, cross-legged. He wasn't asleep. He was holding a piece of paper, scribbling intently with a charcoal pencil. "Thomas, we're leaving, son. Get your shoes on." Thomas looked up, his face expressionless. "Papa, look." He held up the paper. It was a drawing, not of the silent man, but of a location. A small ramshackle shack on a small patch of land surrounded by thick reeds. The sinking patch. "I found the map, Papa," Thomas said, his voice eerily calm. "Mary drew it on the inside of the floorboard. She said the man told her he would wait there for her. He told her if she came, he would give her the key to quiet." "Who told you this, Thomas? Where did you find this map?" "The man in the house, Papa. The man who is here now." Elias froze. He whirled around, raising the rifle. The room was small, and he was certain he was alone with his son. The chilling implication was clear. The silent man had fully infiltrated Thomas's mind, a purely psychological presence built on suggestion and terror. "Thomas, there's no man here. It's just us. We have to go." Elias grabbed his son's arm, pulling him toward the door. As he did, a low, rasping sound came from the corner of the room, near the closet. It was a sound of forced, shallow breathing. Elias lowered the lamp slightly, peering into the deep shadows. The air was colder there, and the metallic scent was stronger. He could make out a dark, hunched figure, draped in what looked like heavy, damp burlap, standing perfectly still, exactly where Thomas was pointing. It was tall and thin, just like the drawings. A real man hidden in the darkest corner. The figure stepped slightly out of the shadow. It wasn't the silent man from the drawings, but a man of flesh and blood, dressed in dark, heavy clothes, his face obscured by a rough hood. He held a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Mr. Stephen," the man said, his voice a low, educated murmur, utterly devoid of threat, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You are interfering with a sensitive procedure. The child must be stabilized for the final observation stage. We only want peace. Don't make this difficult." Elias realized the true nature of the Ordo Silentis operation. They hadn't just used fear. They had used chemistry too. The clear liquid, a potent sedative or narcotic, used to suppress the victim's resistance and accelerate their mental decline. The metallic smell in the house, the remnants of the drugs used on Mary, and now on Thomas. Elias shoved Thomas behind him. "Get out of my house." The man took a slow, deliberate step forward. "We are simply fulfilling a necessary function, Mr. Stephen. The weak must be isolated. The world needs quiet. Now please, stand down. We do not wish to harm the father. Merely to correct the child." Elias didn't hesitate. He swung the butt of the rifle. The blow caught the hooded man squarely on the side of the head with a dull thud. The man collapsed instantly, the syringe clattering harmlessly against the wooden floorboards. "Thomas, stay behind me!" Elias shouted, pulling his son out of the room. He didn't wait for Eleanor. She was too far gone, a casualty of the psychological war. His only priority was his son. He dragged Thomas out the back window and into the pre-dawn Bayou air. They ran towards the boat, the mud sucking at their feet. Elias looked back at the house one last time. In the window of Mary's room, a different shadow moved. A brief, pale flash. Not the tall, dark one he saw before, but a human figure. He realized his chilling mistake. The hooded man was the observer, but the silent man was the actual psychological trigger. The one standing out by the reeds, doing nothing but watching. The one who had broken Mary, and who was likely already at the sinking patch, waiting for Thomas. Elias shoved Thomas into the boat, started the engine, and aimed the bow away from the house, not towards civilization, but towards the only place that could hold the answers and the culprits. The sinking patch. He had to stop the commencement before the high tide, before his son became another terminated subject in the Black Book. The boat cut through the dead calm of the bayou just before sunrise. The only sounds were the motor's rhythmic thrum and Thomas's small, choked sobs. Elias steered with grim resolve, the crumpled page from the Black Book and Thomas's drawing, the map, guiding him. "Papa, where are we going?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling. "We're going to make sure no one can ever hurt you again, son. We're going to the sinking patch, the place Mary drew." Thomas became quiet, staring at the marsh grass whipping past. "He's there, Papa. The man who never moves. He told me he was waiting for the perfect quiet. He's just a man, Thomas. A bad, cruel man who deserves to be found." Elias spoke with a conviction he hoped his son could absorb. The sinking patch was exactly as its name implied, a small, unstable island of hard-packed earth and low-growing weeds, ringed by a nearly impenetrable barrier of towering dead reeds. Elias cut the motor and eased the boat into the reeds, pushing through the tangled stalks until they scraped against the muddy bank. He helped Thomas out and grabbed his rifle. "Stay right here, Thomas. Don't make a sound. Don't move." Thomas nodded, his fear momentarily replaced by a strange, quiet focus. Elias pushed through the last line of reeds and stepped onto the small island. It was circular, maybe 50 feet across, with a small, rickety wooden shack at its center. The hidden structure. The air here was different, carrying a faint chemical tang, the same metallic scent that was in his house, but stronger. Elias moved slowly toward the shack, his rifle ready. The structure was small, no bigger than a single room, built on unstable pilings. He could hear a low, rhythmic scratching sound coming from within. He kicked the door open. Inside, the shack was not empty. A man was hunched over a crude wooden table covered in equipment, old binoculars, detailed Bayou maps, a sheaf of vellum paper, and a small complex telegraph device. He wore no hood, but he was dressed similarly to the man in Thomas's room, dark, damp work clothes. He was older, with slicked-back grey hair and a precise, unsettlingly neat appearance. He was not the silent man. He was the Ordo Silenti's operational director. The man looked up, showing no surprise, only a flicker of annoyance like a professor interrupted during a complex equation. "Mr. Stephen," the man said, his voice crisp and professional. "A messy departure. You should have simply let us conclude our work. We offer a cleaner, more efficient end to their suffering. Where is my son's observer? The silent man?" Elias demanded, aiming the rifle. The man smiled, a thin, chilling expression. "He is fulfilling his final role. He is waiting by the water's edge, Mr. Stephen. He is the beacon, the one who provides the final reassuring visual of his subject's demise." The rhythmic scratching Elias had heard was the man drawing a series of complex geometric symbols on the vellum. "You have the book," Elias noted. "The cipher. You're the one writing the death reports." "Indeed, I am the archivist, the one who catalogues the necessary isolations. Your Mary was a fascinating study, so susceptible. Your Thomas is proving more resilient, which is why we needed the chemical enhancement, but you disrupted the observer's delivery." "You killed my daughter," Elias roared, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We assisted her exit from a life of inevitable misery," the archivist corrected calmly. "The Bayou, Mr. Stephen, is already a tomb. We simply hasten the burial of those who are too weak to cope with the reality of their isolation. We are philanthropists of despair." As Elias prepared to fire, the archivist spoke again, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "The real tragedy, Mr. Stephen, is the man on the beach. He's not just the observer. He's the key to your entire suffering, and he's standing right where your daughter saw him." Elias hesitated, the archivist's calculated lack of fear giving him pause. "What are you talking about?" "Go look, Mr. Stephen. The high tide is turning. Your son is watching. The final observation is about to commence. You need to see who your daughter truly feared." Elias realized he was being manipulated, but the man's final words had struck a nerve of icy dread. He couldn't kill the archivist while Thomas was exposed to the silent man outside. He backed out of the shack, keeping the rifle trained on the door, and ran back toward the reeds where he had left his son. He crashed through the thick foliage. Thomas was no longer by the boat. He was standing on the muddy bank, looking out toward the water. And there, standing perfectly still, exactly as described in the drawings, was the silent man. The man was standing just offshore, ankle-deep in the rising water. He was tall, thin, and draped in burlap, his face a smooth, round mask of rough, dark cloth, the very image of the wooden doll. "Thomas, get back! Get in the boat!" Elias yelled. Thomas didn't move. He pointed a small, trembling finger. "Papa, look at his hand. He has the silver marker." The silent man slowly, deliberately raised his hand. And there, glinting in the pale pre-dawn light, was the small, tarnished silver spoon that Eleanor had been polishing with mechanical devotion. Elias's world tilted. The spoon was supposed to be a tool for Eleanor's manipulation, a symbol of the internal threat. Why would the observer have it? The silent man slowly lowered his hood, pulling back the burlap mask, revealing a face. Elias gasped, dropping his rifle in the mud. The name of the archivist's final, horrifying twist of the knife suddenly became clear. It was Elias's brother, Robert, who had disappeared years ago after a bitter falling out over the land and money, a disappearance the family had always dismissed as a drunken wanderer's folly. Robert, gaunt, his eyes hollowed with a terrifying, vacant intensity, stood there holding the spoon. He was a Stephen. The terror had been familial, orchestrated by the one they trusted, fueled by decades of resentment, isolation, and a deep, malignant jealousy that had festered in the desolate silence of the bayou. He was the silent man who never moved. And now, he finally spoke. "Elias." Robert's voice was a low, dry rasp. "Welcome to the commencement." She didn't fade, brother. She was simply finished. Now, it's the boy's turn. The revelation of Robert as the silent man brought a wave of blinding fury that eclipsed Elias's fear. This wasn't a random, educated monster from a city society. This was a personal, visceral betrayal rooted in the very earth beneath their feet. "Robert, you did this, all of it, to your own niece." Elias scrambled to retrieve his rifle, his hands slick with mud. Robert, standing motionless in the water, merely tilted his head. "Niece? She was a complication, Elias, a noise. All I ever wanted was the quiet. The quiet you stole when you inherited the larger plot of land. The quiet I found with the Ordo Silenti, a society that understood the necessity of isolation. They gave me purpose. They gave me the power to ensure my peace. You're mad, Robert. You murdered Mary with your games." "I simply provided the conditions, brother. She was already fragile. A few calculated sightings, a bit of suggestion, and the silver marker, the constant reminder of the internal collapse, which Eleanor so beautifully reinforced with her endless cleaning. And the job was done. Eleanor always suspected you, Elias, not me. We just nudged her in the right direction." Elias looked back at Thomas, who was watching the scene with a profound, terrifying stillness. The sight of his uncle, his father's flesh and blood, was doing what the psychological games had failed to do quickly. It was breaking him. "Stay back, Thomas," Elias shouted, raising the rifle. Robert took a single, slow step out of the water. The high tide was finally reaching its zenith. "No, Elias, I'm not the target. The boy is. The archivist is waiting. The high tide is the signal. This is when the observer is done. The ultimate psychological trauma. The final silent threat is revealed to be family. He'll never recover from this, Elias. He'll be quiet forever." Elias aimed and fired. The shot went wide, burying itself in the trunk of a nearby cypress. His hands were shaking too violently. Robert didn't flinch. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward Thomas. The silver spoon in his hand flashed in the burgeoning light. "He's coming, Thomas," Robert said, his voice a low, hypnotic drawl. "He's coming for the quiet. Don't fight it. Just accept the silence." Thomas stood frozen, his eyes wide and locked on the spoon. He was utterly paralyzed by the sight of his uncle, the terror figure made flesh. Suddenly, a loud, sharp crack echoed from the direction of the hidden structure. The archivist, standing in the doorway of the shack, had been watching the scene unfold, but he had miscalculated Elias's urgency and the instability of the bayou. The pilings of the shack, loosened by the high tide, had shifted dramatically. The structure began to tilt, groaning under the shift. The archivist, momentarily distracted and struggling to keep his footing, was looking away from the doorway as Elias took advantage of the distraction. Elias sprinted past the paralyzed Thomas, grabbed a large, moss-covered stone from the ground, and lunged at Robert. The two men crashed into the mud. Elias slammed the stone against Robert's head, hard and quick. Robert slumped, dropping the silver spoon, his eyes rolling back. Elias didn't waste a second. He retrieved the spoon and then grabbed Thomas, shoving him towards the boat. "Row, Thomas. Don't look back. Just row." Thomas, finally jarred out of his catatonia, grabbed the oars and began to pull with desperate, childish strength. Elias turned back, the rifle now steady in his hands. He ran toward the listing shack. The archivist was still standing in the doorway, steadying himself on the warped frame, his precise composure finally broken by raw panic. "You're a fool, Stephen," The archivist screamed, his voice high and shrill. "This is a righteous cause. We cleanse the world of weakness." Elias raised the Winchester. "Your righteousness ends now." He fired twice. The shots hit the archivist in the chest. The man crumpled, sliding down the doorframe and disappearing into the shadowed interior of the collapsing shack. Elias turned and ran back to the boat. He pushed them away from the unstable bank, the mud and high water now a churning froth. As they pulled away, the rickety shack gave a final, agonizing groan. The piling snapped, and the entire structure slid sideways and down, sinking quickly into the deep mud and water of the sinking patch. The small temporary island was consumed by the Bayou's indifference. The archivist, his maps, his notes, and the last of the Ordo Silenti's immediate presence were gone. Elias looked back at the place where Robert had fallen. The tide was already washing over the spot. There was no sign of his brother. The Bayou had claimed him, another body in its endless muddy cemetery. Elias sat down heavily in the boat, the silver spoon clutched in his hand. He looked at his son, rowing them away from the terror. Thomas was shaking, but he was alive, and he was moving. The silence had been broken by the sound of gunfire and his own desperate resolve. He still had to face Eleanor, still had to put the pieces of his family back together, and still had to find a way to make Thomas whole again. But as the sun finally broke over the reeds, painting the water gold, Elias knew one thing. He had faced a deep, human evil rooted in the envy and twisted psychology of his own family, and he had survived the commencement. The truth was exposed and the physical threat was neutralized. The evil lurking in the Bayou was family. The Stephen saga of terror and betrayal is far from over. Will Elias be able to save Thomas and Eleanor from the psychological damage, and what secrets still linger beneath the surface of the swamp? To find out how the Stephen family rebuilds or collapses, you must subscribe and hit the bell for the final 3 chapters. The journey back was slow and silent. Thomas, exhausted and traumatized, lay in the boat's bottom, his eyes vacant. Elias, soaked and aching, steered steadily toward their house, which seemed both a shelter and a grave. He found Eleanor where he had left her, in the parlor, staring blankly at the cold fireplace. "Eleanor," Elias said, his voice raw. He showed her the tarnished silver spoon. "It's over. I found the silver marker. Robert and the archivist are gone. They can't hurt us." Her eyes focused on the spoon, but her expression remained blank. "The quiet," she whispered. "Did you bring the quiet back, Elias?" "No, Eleanor. I brought back the truth." He sat beside her, holding her cold hands. "They were not protectors. They were killers. They used the spoon to convince you to be silent, compliant. They engineered this to destroy our faith in each other. But we're here. We are together. We will get through this." Elias spoke for a long time, detailing the full betrayal. The Ordo Silenti method, the cipher book, Robert's malignant envy, and the final confrontation at the sinking patch. As he finished, Eleanor's psychological armor finally cracked. "I let them do it," she choked out, tears breaking free. "I was so lost after Mary. When that man gave me the spoon back, he said it was a sign of peace. He said you were the one bringing the noise. I almost failed Thomas." Elias pulled her close. "You were their victim, Eleanor. We used our grief and isolation against us. Now we fight it with the truth." The psychological terror lingered, thick and poisonous. Elias knew he needed expertise. "I need to go back to Mrs. LeBlanc. She knows their methods. She can tell us how to break the spell they cast on Thomas and on you." Eleanor nodded, a new fragile clarity in her eyes. "Go, but take me to Thomas first." She sat by Thomas's bedside, gently stroking his hair. "My precious boy," she murmured. "Mama will keep the noise away now, the real noise." Elias left them and made the trip back to the recluse's cottage, carrying the black book. "You're alive," Mrs. LeBlanc observed, accepting the book. The Ordo Silenti is not easily destroyed, but without the leader, the cell collapses. Elias recounted everything. The physical threat is gone, but the damage is done. Thomas is catatonic. How do we reverse this? Mrs. LeBlanc opened the black book, pointing to a deciphered passage. The Ordo Silenti broke faith with the world. The key to the reversal is to re-establish those connections with overwhelming clarity and authenticity. She pointed to another phrase. The final trauma cannot be a source of shame. It must be turned into a shared victory. The victim must feel not just safe, but vindicated. What does that mean for Thomas? Elias asked desperately. Thomas needs to be the one who saves himself, she explained. He needs to face the terror, not as a victim, but as a survivor who outsmarted the threat. And you, Mr. Stephen, must show him tangibly what happened to the evil man who wanted to silence him. Mrs. LeBlanc's plan was risky, demanding that Elias use the very geography of the Bayou, the source of their fear, to stage a final, powerful moment of psychological closure for Thomas. The only path to healing was to confront the darkest truth of their ordeal. Elias returned home with a fierce, singular purpose. He found Eleanor seated beside Thomas, humming. "Eleanor, we have to do something radical," he said. "Mrs. LeBlanc says Thomas needs to be vindicated. He needs proof that the silent man is truly gone, not just hidden." "What do we do?" she asked, her eyes steady. "We're taking Thomas back to the sinking patch. We're going to show him the end of the Ordo Silenti." "Elias, no, it will break him," she gasped. "No. Hiding the truth is what broke Mary. Showing him the raw, final end of the man who terrorized him is the only thing that will set him free. He needs to see the chaos, the destruction, the total reversal of the quiet that was promised." Elias gently lifted Thomas, wrapping him in a blanket. Eleanor, fueled by her new resolve, followed with a lantern. The boat ride was tense, but Elias felt only a driving necessity. When they reached the sinking patch, the receding high tide revealed a muddy, chaotic scene. The rickety shack was gone, completely submerged. The island was a morass of churned mud and debris. Elias cut the motor. He spoke softly to Thomas, whose eyes were wide but fixed. "Thomas, look at what's left of the quiet. They promised you silence, but they brought noise and death." Elias picked up the wooden spoon and threw it into the deep mud with contempt. "That spoon, son, was a lie. This house," he pointed to the remnants of the doorframe sticking out, "this was where the lies were made. It was a weak, sinking place, and it failed. The Bayou didn't want their evil, it swallowed the quiet." Wading into the mud, Elias began to dig where the center of the shack had been, searching for tangible proof. After several agonizing minutes, he pulled out the archivist's telegraph device, twisted and crushed by the collapse, covered in mud. He held it up to Thomas. "This is the machine that sent the quiet to us, son. It's broken. It can never be used again. We broke it." Then Eleanor's voice, clear and strong, cut through the marsh sounds. She pointed toward the far perimeter. "Elias, look, by the old roots." Elias turned. Half submerged in the thick, viscous mud was a dark piece of waterlogged cloth, pinned by a mangrove root. He pulled at it, revealing the burlap hood, the round, faceless mask of the silent man. The mud had claimed Robert, but his silent face, the instrument of their terror, remained. Elias held the muddy, crushed mask up for Thomas to see. "This is the mask of the man who never moves, Thomas. It's just a dirty piece of cloth. No power, no magic, just a man's hate. And now the hate is dead. It is buried here. This is not Mary's quiet, Thomas. This is the truth. The world is noisy and hard, but we are here, together, and we fight the silence with our voices." He threw the mask into the center of the pit. It disappeared beneath the muddy water with a soft, final glug. He turned back to Thomas, his son's eyes fixed first on the ruin, then on the mask. Slowly, tentatively, began to move. They settled on his father, then his mother, who was weeping with relief. Thomas finally opened his mouth and spoke, his voice thin but recognizable. "The noise. It's a good noise, Papa." Elias felt a cathartic wave of relief. The terror had been broken by the relentless, authentic truth. They spent an hour surveying the destruction, allowing the visual evidence of the enemy's annihilation to sink in. They left the crumpled telegraph and the silver marker spoon in the mud, a powerful symbol of their hard-won victory. They returned home as the sun set, Thomas talking, asking his mother about dinner, asking Elias about the boat patch. He was asking questions about life. The house now felt less like a trap, and more like a hard-won shelter. The silence was gone, replaced by the familiar natural sounds of the deep Bayou night. Recovery in the Stephen house began with a slow, deliberate march. The first crucial step was purging the psychological remnants. Elias found the blood-stained patch in Thomas's room, and more disturbingly, a small dried vial hidden beneath the floorboard, the drug used to enhance Thomas's suggestibility. Elias burned the vial and scrubbed the floor until the scent of lye replaced the metallic tang. Eleanor, her emotional scars deep but her mental clarity restored, took the lead in filling the house with the good noise. She cooked, she cleaned, and she spoke constantly. She spoke of Mary, not as a victim, but as the strong, brave girl who had fought the terror long enough to leave them the crucial clues. The following day, Elias made his final trip to Mrs. LeBlanc, handing back the black book. "You saved my family, Mrs. LeBlanc," he said. "No, Mr. Stephen, I merely gave you the key. You chose the brave path of the truth. That is your strength." She advised him to keep the book's cover as a testament to the fact that their ordeal was real. Not a madness, but a calculated human evil. The Ordo Silenti operates on isolation. You must never let the silence between your family take root again. Elias felt a sense of final closure. He stopped by the general store, where Mr. Dubois gave him a hesitant, sympathetic nod. The town's previous suspicion replaced by a newfound, awkward respect for the man who had survived a personal disaster. Elias kept the full truth of Robert's involvement private, allowing the sinking of the shack to remain the official, vague accident. The last piece of recovery came a week later. Elias took Thomas out on the boat to repair the hull. "Papa," Thomas said, watching him work, "why did Uncle Robert do it?" Elias chose his words carefully. He was a very sad, very angry man, Thomas. The Ordo Silenti found his anger and told him that if he made everyone else quiet, his own noise would stop. But it's not true. Silence only makes the anger louder. Real peace is finding the good noise, the sound of your mother singing, the sound of us talking. Thomas nodded, absorbing the complex human tragedy. He looked out at the bayou. "I still see the reeds, Papa," he admitted quietly. "And sometimes I still think he's standing there." "I know, son," Elias said, placing his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "He left a scar. But listen." Elias let the natural sounds of the bayou wash over them. "The reeds are always there, Thomas. But now, when you look at them, you don't just see the silent man. You see the hiding place that failed. You see the place where your father and mother fought for you. You see the spot where you rowed us to safety." Thomas smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I'm not quiet anymore, Papa. No, you are not. And you never will be." The Stephen family remained in the bayou. They learned that the true horror was not the swamp itself, but the human capacity for calculated cruelty and the vulnerability of the isolated mind. They lived with the scars, but also with an unshakable, hard-earned knowledge. The greatest defense against psychological terror is not a locked door or a quiet mind, but the fierce, noisy, and absolutely authentic connection to the ones you love. They emerged not unscathed, but undeniably stronger, forever bonded by the secret of the disturbing story that was too dark for the world to cover.